3,218 meters. That's 2 miles of frozen hell between a bullet and its target. 2 miles of screaming wind and blizzard snow, and air so cold it burns your lungs with every breath. 2 miles where gravity bends physics, where the Earth's rotation pulls trajectories sideways, where a single gust of wind can turn a perfect shot into empty space. And 9 American soldiers were about to die because the only person sent to bridge that distance was a woman they'd never heard of. They laughed when she arrived. They stopped laughing exactly 5.8 seconds after her second trigger pull. Alaska, February 2024. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill, it murders. Minus 34 Celsius at ground level. Winds sustained at 65 kilometers per hour, gusting to 85. Visibility measured in arm lengths. The sort of weather that makes helicopters fall from the sky and turns human skin to frostbite in under 90 seconds. Captain Garrett Blackwood had been awake for 38 hours. He pressed his back against the frozen rock face of the crevice and tried to remember what warmth felt like. His team, what remained of it, huddled in the narrow crack in the mountain like animals waiting for the kill. 9 men, 3 wounded, 1 dying. The dying one was Corporal Landon Pierce. Pierce lay on his side with his legs stretched out at an angle that made Blackwood's stomach turn. The bullet had punched through his thigh plate 36 hours ago, buried itself deep in the muscle above his knee. The wound had been manageable at first. Painful, yes. Bleeding, yes, but manageable. 36 hours in sub-zero temperatures changed everything. Master Sergeant Cole Merrick crouched beside Pierce, pressing a blood-soaked compress against the wound. But it wasn't the blood that worried Blackwood anymore. It was the color. Pierce's leg had gone from angry red to a grayish purple that looked like meat left too long in a freezer. The infection had set in fast, faster than any of them expected. And Pierce had stopped complaining about the pain 2 hours ago. When a soldier stops complaining about pain, it means the body is shutting down non-essential systems. It means the body is making choices about what it can afford to keep alive. Captain. Merrick's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the wind. Blackwood crawled over, his knees scraping against ice. Talk to me. He's going hypothermic, core temps dropping, the infection spreading. Merrick's hands were covered in Pierce's blood. They'd been covered in blood for most of the last day and a half. We need medevac. Now. Not in 6 hours. Not in 3. Now. Blackwood looked at Pierce's face. The corporal's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something that wasn't there. His lips moved soundlessly. Blackwood had seen this before. Too many times before. I'm working on it, Blackwood said. That was a lie, and they both knew it. The radio sat in the corner of the crevice like a broken promise. Specialist Webb had gotten it working twice in the last 38 hours. Twice. Both times for less than 10 minutes before the battery died again, or the satellite connection dropped, or the atmospheric conditions turned the signal into static. The enemy sniper made sure they never had enough time. Every 3 to 4 hours, like clockwork, a single round would crack into the rocks near their position. Not aimed to kill, aimed to remind. The message was clear. I'm still here, you're still mine. Move, and I'll prove it. Blackwood had tried to get eyes on the shooter. Impossible. The high ground was 3,218 meters away, measured precisely by their rangefinder before it died. Over 3 kilometers of open valley filled with blowing snow and zero visibility. The shooter had elevation, thermal optics, and all the patience in the world. They tried to move twice. Both times the shooter had put rounds so close to their position that rock fragments exploded like shrapnel. Private First Class Owen had a gash across his cheekbone from a stone shard. The blood had frozen before it reached his chin. So they stayed, pinned, waiting, dying slowly. Captain, we've got signal. Blackwood's head snapped up. Webb was hunched over the radio, his fingers blue from working the connections without gloves. The kid was 22 years old and looked 60. How long? Blackwood asked. Don't know. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe less. Blackwood grabbed the handset. His fingers were so cold he could barely feel the plastic. Kodiak, Maine. Kodiak, Maine, this is Raven 6. Emergency traffic. How copy? Static. Then, Raven 6, Kodiak, Maine. We read you weak, but readable. Send traffic. Blackwood closed his eyes. Thank God. Kodiak, Maine, we are still pinned at Grid November, Quebec 7482. 9 personnel, 3 urgent casualties, 1 critical. We need immediate medevac and fire support on enemy sniper position. Coordinates to follow. The pause on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. In combat communications, 4 seconds is an eternity. Raven 6, Kodiak, Maine, negative on air assets. Weather ceiling is 200 feet. Winds aloft exceeding safe flight parameters. No rotary wing, no fixed wing, no drone coverage available for your grid. Blackwood felt something cold settle in his chest, colder than the air around him. Kodiak, Maine, say again? We have a critical casualty. He will not survive another 48 hours. Raven 6, understood. We are working your request. Current option, ground asset en route to your position. ETA approximately 60 minutes. Ground asset? Blackwood's voice sharpened. What kind of ground asset? Another pause. Longer this time. Blackwood could hear voices in the background on the other end. Someone was having a conversation they didn't want him to hear. Raven 6, be advised. We are sending you a shooter, precision fire specialist, extreme long-range qualified. Blackwood blinked. 1 shooter? Affirm, 1 shooter. Call sign Ghost. Currently staged at Forward Operating Point Echo. Will be at your position within the hour. Across the crevice, Lieutenant Bryce Holden looked up from where he'd been checking Specialist Owen's shoulder wound. Holden was 24 years old, West Point, first deployment. His face was young enough that the cold hadn't carved lines into it yet. Sir, Holden said carefully, did they just say 1 shooter? Against a sniper at 3,000 meters in a blizzard? Blackwood didn't answer. He pressed the handset closer to his ear. Kodiak, Maine, what is the designation of this shooter? Unit assignment? Raven 6, shooter is Staff Sergeant Elena Ashford, currently assigned to the Extreme Long Range Program, Fort Carson. She is your best option until weather breaks. Acknowledge. Blackwood felt every man in the crevice go still. They're sending us a woman? Holden said. Not loud, not aggressive, just confused, like he'd heard wrong. Merrick didn't look up from Pierce's leg. They're sending us a shooter, Lieutenant. Gender doesn't pull triggers. I'm not, Holden caught himself. I'm not questioning her qualifications, Sergeant. I'm questioning the range. 3,200 meters in these conditions? That's not a shot. That's a prayer. Then we better hope she's got faith, Blackwood said. He keyed the radio one more time. Kodiak, Maine, Raven 6 copies. We will stand by for Ghost's arrival. Be advised, enemy sniper is active and accurate at our position. Route in from the south if possible. North approach is exposed. Roger, Raven 6. Ghost has been briefed. She knows the terrain. Kodiak, Maine out. The radio clicked off. Silence settled over the crevice. Not peaceful silence. The kind of silence that comes before someone says something nobody wants to hear. Webb broke it first. Ghost. I've heard that call sign before. Where? Blackwood asked. Fort Benning. Last year. There was a woman going through sniper school. They said she could read wind like it was written down. They said her old man taught her something the Army didn't know how to teach. What's her old man? Merrick asked. Webb shrugged. Don't know, just heard the rumors. Holden pulled his neck gaiter down. His face was red from cold, and something else. Frustration, maybe, or fear dressed up as skepticism. Captain, with all due respect, the distance to that shooter is over 3 kilometers. The world record for a confirmed sniper kill is 3,540 meters. That was made by a Canadian Special Forces operator with perfect conditions, a spotter team, and multiple ranging shots. We're talking about one person in a blizzard with crosswinds that are probably gusting past 80 clicks, trying to hit a target she's never seen before. Blackwood looked at the lieutenant for a long moment. "What would you have me do, Lieutenant? Tell Kodiak we'd prefer to wait?" "I'd have you set realistic expectations, sir, because if this shooter misses, and statistically she will miss, we need a backup plan." "The backup plan is 48 hours away when the weather breaks," Blackwood said. "Pierce doesn't have 48 hours, so we take the option we're given and we pray it works." Holden opened his mouth to respond, then thought better of it. He pulled his gaiter back up and turned away. Merrick looked at Blackwood. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, but something hard lived behind them. 19 years in the Army had put that hardness there. 19 years of watching good men bleed. "Captain," Merrick said quietly, "I've been doing this a long time, and in all that time I've met exactly 3 people who scared me. Not because they were loud or big or mean, because they were quiet in a way that meant something. And I heard stories about a female shooter at Fort Carson. They call her Ghost because you don't hear her coming. They say she doesn't blink when she shoots, doesn't breathe, doesn't exist for the 6 seconds it takes a bullet to fly." Merrick paused. "If the stories are even half true, she'll be number 4. Blackwood nodded slowly. "Then I guess we're about to find out if stories are worth a damn." 57 minutes later, she appeared. Nobody heard her coming. That was the first thing that unsettled them. 9 men in a frozen crevice, all of them trained, all of them on edge, all of them listening for any sound that wasn't wind or rock or their own labored breathing. And she materialized like she'd grown out of the ice itself. White oversuit, white pack, white rifle wrap. Even her face was painted in broken patterns of gray and white, disrupting the outline of bone structure and making her features blur into the background. The only color on her was the pale gray blue of her eyes when she pulled her neck gaiter down. "Staff Sergeant Elena Ashford," she said. "Call sign Ghost. Reporting as ordered." Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't soft, just factual, like she was checking in for a shift at some quiet office instead of a frozen hellscape where men were dying. Blackwood stood up. His knees popped. Everything hurt. "Captain Garrett Blackwood, appreciate you making the trip, Staff Sergeant." "Not a trip, sir. It's the job." She looked past him at the 9 men huddled in the crevice. Her eyes moved methodically, cataloging wounds, assessing readiness, calculating something Blackwood couldn't see. "Brief me, situation, enemy position, casualties, timeline." Blackwood gave it to her tight and clean. 38 hours pinned. Enemy sniper at 3,218 meters. Elevated position, thermal optics, harassment fire every 3 to 4 hours. 3 casualties. Owen with shoulder wound, stable. Wallace with facial lacerations from rock fragments, ambulatory. Pierce with infected leg wound, critical condition, needs medevac within hours. Elena listened without expression. She didn't nod, didn't react, just absorbed information like a computer processing data. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. "Elevation difference between us and the shooter?" "Approximately 410 meters. He's above us." "Time interval between his harassment rounds?" "Random, but generally every 3 to 4 hours." "Wind pattern at your level?" Blackwood hesitated. "Sustained 60 to 70 kilometers per hour from the northwest, gusting higher." "I don't mean what you feel," Elena said. "I mean measured. Do you have wind data, atmospheric readings, barometric pressure over time?" "Negative. Our equipment died on day 1. Elena's eyes flicked to the sky, then back to Blackwood. "Understood." Holden leaned forward from his position against the rock wall. He'd been quiet since Elena arrived, studying her with the kind of careful attention people use when they're trying to figure out if something is real or a trick. "Staff Sergeant," he said carefully, "the distance to that position is 3,218 meters, in a blizzard. With crosswinds we can't even accurately measure. You're talking about a shot that's physically—" "Physically what?" Elena asked. "Not defensive, not aggressive. Just curious, the way a math teacher asks a student to explain their wrong answer." "Impossible," Holden said. Elena looked at him the way someone looks at a clock that's telling the wrong time. Not angry, not offended, just noting an error that needs correction. "The Barrett M82 record is 2,800 meters, she said. "The Chi-Tac system I'm carrying was designed specifically for engagements past 3,000. The .408 Cheyenne tactical round maintains supersonic flight to 3,800 meters in standard atmospheric conditions. This isn't standard atmosphere. It's cold, which means denser air, which means the round stays stable longer. The distance isn't the problem, Lieutenant." "Then what is the problem?" "The wind," Elena said. "The wind is always the problem." She turned back to Blackwood. "I need a position with line of sight to the high ground, and I need 2 hours of observation before I take any shot." "2 hours?" Merrick said from behind his blood-soaked hands. "Staff Sergeant, we've got a man dying." "And if I rush the shot and miss, you'll have more men dying," Elena said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't harden, just stated fact like gravity or time. 2 hours, non-negotiable. Nobody argued. She set up 60 meters from the main group, at the far edge of the crevice where a natural shelf in the rock gave her a narrow window to the high ground. The position was exposed, partially visible to anyone scanning that sector with thermal optics. Blackwood followed her out. The wind hit him like a physical force, trying to peel him off the mountain. "Staff Sergeant," he called over the howl. "You sure about that position?" Elena was already unpacking her rifle. The drag bag came off, revealing a weapon that looked too long for her frame. The barrel extended well past what Blackwood expected, custom-built for extreme distance. "I need the angle," she said. "This is the only place that gives me a clear ballistic path through the valley." "You'll be exposed." "I know. If he sees you, then he'll shoot at me instead of your men," Elena said. She looked at Blackwood directly. Those gray-blue eyes held something that made him stop talking. Not fear, not bravado, something else. Certainty. "That's an improvement, isn't it, Captain?" Blackwood opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "What do you need from us?" "Silence," Elena said. "Nobody moves. Nobody talks above a whisper. I need to hear the wind." "You need to hear the wind." "The wind has layers, Captain. At this altitude, in this terrain, there are at least 3 distinct wind channels between me and that target. I can see 2 of them through thermal imaging. The snow moves differently in each layer. But the third one, the one at mid-altitude between 800 and 1,400 meters, I can't see it." "Then how—" "I can only hear it," Elena said. She was setting up a small recording device now, angling it toward the valley. "That's the layer that will make me miss. So I need to hear it, which means I need your team silent, completely silent. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good." She settled into position behind her rifle, making micro-adjustments to her rest. "Go back to your men, Captain. Stay warm. I'll signal when I'm ready." Blackwood started to leave, then stopped. "Staff Sergeant?" "Sir, where did you learn to shoot like this?" Elena didn't look up from her scope. "My father." "Your father military?" "Marines, sniper, Gulf War, Mogadishu." "Good stock," Blackwood said. "The best." Elena's voice softened for just a moment, just one. "He taught me something most people don't know, something his mentor taught him in a war most people have forgotten." "What's that?" Elena looked up then. Her eyes caught the flat gray light of the storm. "That the wind talks, Captain. And if you listen long enough, really listen, it'll tell you exactly where to aim." Blackwood walked back to his team in silence. Holden was waiting. Well, she's setting up. She's going to take the shot from there? Holden's voice had an edge now. Captain, she's completely exposed. That sniper has thermal optics. He'll see her heat signature lit up like a Christmas tree. I know. He'll kill her. Maybe, Blackwood said. Or maybe she'll kill him first. Either way, it's her call. She knows the risk. Merrick was still working on Pierce, but his head was tilted slightly toward the conversation. She's not worried about the sniper, Lieutenant. How do you know? Holden asked. Because I watched her face when the captain told her the position was exposed. Most people hear that. Their eyes change. Fear response. Pupil dilation. Something. She didn't even blink. Merrick adjusted the compress on Pierce's leg with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere in the last hour. She's already done the math. She knows exactly what's about to happen, and she's not scared of it. That doesn't make sense, Holden said. Sure it does, Merrick replied. You're just thinking about it wrong. You're thinking about bravery, courage, all that Hollywood garbage. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Merrick looked at the lieutenant with eyes that had seen 19 years of men pretending to be certain when they were terrified. Certainty, he said. She's not brave, Lieutenant. She's certain. There's a difference. 60 meters away, Elena Ashford lay on the ice shelf and began to work. She didn't pray, didn't hope, didn't bargain with God or fate or the universe. She calculated. Distance, 3,218 meters. Confirmed by laser rangefinder before the battery died. Elevation angle, 8.1 degrees. The target was above her, which meant the bullet would fight gravity harder on the way up, then fall faster on the way down. Temperature, minus 34 Celsius at her position. Colder at altitude, probably minus 40 at mid-flight. Cold air is denser. Dense air slows bullets. She'd need to account for roughly 18 feet per second of velocity loss. Barometric pressure. She didn't have a working barometer, but she could feel it dropping. The way the air pressed against her skin. The way sound carried differently. A storm was building on top of the storm they already had. That would affect the bullet's flight path in ways her ballistic computer couldn't predict. Humidity, near zero. Dry cold, good for ballistics. Water vapor bends light and slows bullets. Dry air is honest air. Spindrift, at 3,218 meters, with a right-hand twist barrel, the bullet would drift approximately 4.2 meters to the right of her point of aim. Physics, not negotiable. Coriolis effect, 1.1 meters at this latitude. The Earth rotates beneath a bullet in flight. At extreme distance, you have to account for planetary motion. Most people don't think about shooting around the curve of the Earth. Elena did. And then there was the wind. She pulled out her notebook, waterproof paper, pencil, no electronics because electronics freeze and mathematics doesn't. She began recording what she could see through her thermal scope. The snow didn't fall straight. It moved in rivers. 3 rivers. One near the ground, maybe 50 meters up, moving right to left. Visible through thermal as a distinct pattern of cold air displacing warmer air. One higher, perhaps 500 meters altitude, moving left to right, counter-rotating, also visible. And the third one, the one at mid-altitude, somewhere between 800 and 1,400 meters downrange. That layer was in a thermal dead zone where the snow had already sublimated, turned directly from ice to vapor without melting. No visible particles to track, no thermal signature to read, but she could hear it. Elena activated her acoustic recorder and listened. The wind sang, 3 different frequencies layered over each other like an orchestra warming up. Low frequency at ground level, 35 to 40 hertz, the deep bass note of air moving through the valley floor. High frequency up top, 75 to 80 hertz, the sharp whistle of wind compressed through the mountain peaks. And between them, the mid-range, the one she couldn't see, 55 to 60 hertz when it was running full strength. But every 21 to 23 minutes, She'd observed this 4 times now. The frequency dropped. 55 hertz down to 45. The mid-altitude wind would slow for 15 to 20 seconds. Not a full lull, not calm, but a reduction. A window. That window was the difference between a hit and a miss. She wrote the numbers down. Not because she'd forget them, because documentation is what turns impossible into fact. And facts don't care who laughed. Bullet flight time at 3,218 meters with a .408 Cheyenne Tactical, 5.8 seconds. 5.8 seconds. Most gunfights are decided in fractions of a second. A bullet at close range arrives before the sound of its own gunshot. Even at long range, say 1,000 meters, the flight time is barely over a second. But 5.8 seconds is an eternity. In 5.8 seconds, the wind could shift 3 times. The target could move. The temperature gradient along the bullet's path could change the air density enough to alter trajectory by meters. She wasn't shooting at a man. She was shooting at a point in space where she predicted a man would be in 5.8 seconds, through an atmosphere she couldn't fully measure. Across a distance most people couldn't drive in under 3 minutes. And she had to be right within 18 inches. She pressed her eye to the scope and watched. Minute 67. The enemy sniper fired another harassment round. It impacted the rock wall above Blackwood's position, sending fragments spraying across the crevice. She heard someone curse, heard Merrick calling for pressure on a wound. The enemy was reminding them he was still there. Elena didn't move. Minute 83. She observed the 4th wind pattern cycle, 22 minutes from the last one. The frequency dropped from 58 hertz to 47, held there for 17 seconds, then climbed back up to 61, consistent, predictable, exploitable. Minute 91. Her barrel temperature had dropped 4 degrees since she'd set up. The metal was contracting in the cold. That would affect the harmonic vibration of the barrel when she fired. Every rifle barrel whips when a bullet passes through it, flexes and oscillates in a pattern unique to that specific weapon. Elena had fired over 5,000 rounds through this exact barrel. She knew its resonance the way a musician knows the voice of their instrument. In this cold, the barrel would be stiffer. The harmonic would be tighter. The bullet would leave the muzzle fractionally higher than it would in normal conditions. She adjusted her elevation down by 1/10 of a milliradian. Nobody watching would have seen her move. The adjustment was microscopic. But that 1/10 of a mil at 3,218 meters was the difference between a hit and a miss by almost 12 inches. Minute 104. Elena felt it before she saw it. A subtle shift in pressure against her left cheek. The wind was changing. Not at ground level, that was still steady, but higher up. The frequency in her headset was shifting. 60 hertz down to 58, down to 55. The 5th window was opening. She placed her finger on the trigger, not pressing, resting. Her adjustments were already dialed. 2 meters left correction for the gust pattern she'd identified. Additional 0.2 mils of elevation for the temperature drop in the last 20 minutes. Spin drift recalculated for the slightly lower muzzle velocity of a barrel that had cooled further in the cold. Every variable accounted for except one. She couldn't account for what the wind would do in the 6th second. No human could. All she could do was read the pattern, trust the mathematics, and accept that the rest was physics. Minute 119. The snow shifted. The mid-altitude river of wind hesitated, just slightly, like a singer pausing between phrases. Elena pressed the push-to-talk button on her radio. 1 click. In the crevice 60 meters away, Blackwood heard it. He looked at Merrick. "She's going to shoot," Merrick said quietly. Every man who was conscious went still. Even Pierce, drifting in and out, seemed to sense the change in the air. Elena breathed in, let half the breath go. Between heartbeats, in that ancient silence that exists between one pulse and the next, she broke the trigger. The rifle cracked like thunder against the rock walls. The recoil drove into her shoulder. Familiar, expected, absorbed. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. She watched through the thermal scope. 1 second, 2 seconds. The bullet passed through the first wind layer. She could see its trajectory as a faint disturbance in the thermal image, like a stone skipping across water. 3 seconds, falling now, 62 meters below the original line of sight, exactly as calculated. 4 seconds, spindrift pulling it right, Coriolis pulling it left, gravity pulling it down. 5 seconds. The bullet entered the mid-altitude layer, the layer she could only hear, the layer that was supposed to be quiet. 5.8 seconds. The thermal signature on the high ground didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react. Miss. Elena's jaw tightened, just barely. A millimeter of movement in the muscles around her mouth. That was the only sign she gave. She pulled the data. Wind had gusted 11 degrees off prediction at the moment of firing. A microburst. Invisible. Unforecastable. The bullet had passed left of the target by approximately 2 meters. 2 meters at 3,218. Most shooters on Earth couldn't land within 20 meters at that distance. She'd missed by 2. But the enemy sniper reacted. When the bullet impacted the rock near his position, close enough that he felt the concussion, heard the crack of supersonic flight, he shifted, and he fired back. The round screamed past Elena's position and slammed into the crevice wall above Blackwood's team. Rock exploded. Fragments sprayed across the huddled men. Someone screamed. The enemy now knew someone was shooting back, and the enemy now knew the approximate position. Elena was exposed, and the next wind window was 21 minutes away. In the crevice, Holden's voice rose above the others. "She missed. Captain, she missed. She needs to pull back before—" "She's not pulling back," Blackwood said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the panic like a blade. "Captain, with respect, she missed. The range is too far. The conditions are—" "She missed by 2 meters, Lieutenant." Holden stopped. "At 3,200 meters, Blackwood continued, in a blizzard, with sustained crosswinds, she missed by 2 meters. Do you understand what that means?" Holden shook his head slowly. Blackwood leaned close. His voice dropped to barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything he'd learned in 12 years of command. "It means the second shot won't miss." 60 meters away, Elena Ashford made new calculations and didn't move an inch. The enemy was walking rounds toward her position now, and she was going to wait him out, because somewhere between heartbeats, between fear and certainty, between impossible and done, that's where ghosts live. 21 minutes. That's how long Elena Ashford had to live on an ice shelf while an enemy sniper walked bullets toward her skull. 21 minutes until the wind patterns cycled again. 21 minutes until the next window opened and she could take her second shot. 21 minutes of mathematics versus mortality. She lay perfectly still and began the countdown in her head. Minute 1. The enemy's second round came exactly where she expected it, overhead, close enough that she heard the snap of the bullet breaking the sound barrier as it passed 2 meters above her position, close enough that the pressure wave disturbed the snow around her ghillie suit. He was bracketing her, walking his fire in, testing the distance. Elena's breathing didn't change. 6 breaths per minute, controlled, measured. Her heart rate held steady at 52 beats per minute. In the crevice 60 meters behind her, men were probably panicking, probably arguing about whether she should pull back, take cover, abort the mission. She couldn't hear them, didn't need to. The only voice that mattered right now was the wind. She recalculated the first shot in her head. The miss had been clean. No equipment malfunction, no scope error, no miscalculation on the fundamentals. Just wind. The mid-altitude layer had gusted 11 degrees off her prediction at the exact moment the bullet passed through. A microburst she couldn't have seen or heard or predicted. But now she had new data. The miss itself was information. The bullet had gone 2 meters left, which meant the wind had pushed harder from the right than she'd calculated, which meant the next shot needed 1 mils of left hold to compensate. She wrote the number in her notebook with fingers that should have been numb, but weren't. Cold didn't bother her the way it bothered other people. Her father had taught her that on the ranch in Wyoming when she was 9 years old, sitting in a deer blind in January with snow coming down and her breath making clouds in the air. The memory came unbidden. Wyoming, 2004, 20 years ago. Elena was 9 years old, and her mother had been dead for 3 years, and the world was a place made of silence and wind, and the distant crack of her father's rifle teaching her what mattered. Nathaniel Ashford didn't talk much, didn't need to. He communicated in demonstrations, in patterns, in the careful repetition of actions until they became reflexes, buried deeper than thought. "Watch the grass," he said. They were sitting on a ridge overlooking the north pasture. Below them, maybe 400 yards out, a coyote was circling the fence line where 3 calves grazed. The coyote had already killed 2 calves that week. Tonight it would kill again unless someone stopped it. Elena watched the grass. It moved in waves. Not uniform waves, different patterns at different heights. Near the ground, the blades bent left to right. Higher up, maybe 2 feet off the ground, they swayed right to left. 2 layers, Nathaniel said. "You see it?" "Yes, sir." Most people see one wind, one direction. They think wind is simple. He adjusted the scope on his rifle, a custom .308 with a barrel he'd built himself. Wind is never simple. It's like water in a river, different speeds at different depths. You want to hit what you're aiming at, you need to read every layer. How do I do that? You watch, you listen, and you learn to hear what the wind is saying when it's not making any noise at all. That didn't make sense to 9-year-old Elena. Wind was noise. Wind was the howl outside her bedroom window at night, the rattle of the barn door, the whistle through the fence posts. Nathaniel saw her confusion. He put down the rifle and held up one hand, palm flat, moving it through the air in front of her face. "Feel that?" "Yes, sir. That's ground-level wind, maybe 5 miles an hour. Now watch." He moved his hand higher, above her head. "Feel it now?" Elena concentrated. The air pressure against her face changed, slightly, barely, but it changed. "Different," she said. "Different speed, different direction, same air, different layer." He lowered his hand. "The bullet has to fly through all of it, every layer, every change. You miss one, you miss the target." "How do you know what every layer is doing?" Nathaniel picked up the rifle again, settled into position. His breathing slowed. His body went still in a way that made him look like part of the landscape instead of something separate from it. "You listen," he said. "Close your eyes." Elena closed her eyes. "What do you hear?" "Wind." "What else?" She concentrated. At first there was just the low rush of air moving across the valley. But then, underneath that, she heard something else, a higher pitch, a hum that oscillated between 2 frequencies. "There's a sound," she said, "like a note. It changes. That's the mid-level wind, the layer you can't see. It's moving through that gap between the 2 ridges over there, and the gap acts like a wind tunnel. When the wind speeds up, the pitch goes up. When it slows down, the pitch drops." Elena opened her eyes. "You can tell wind speed by sound?" "If you practice enough." Nathaniel's eye was pressed to the scope now. "Your grandfather taught me this. He learned it from a gunnery sergeant named Tobias Kincaid during the Korean War. Kincaid was a sniper at the Chosin Reservoir in 1950. Coldest winter in 100 years. Wind so bad it froze men solid where they stood. Kincaid couldn't see the wind because of the snow, so he learned to hear it instead. Did it work? Kincaid made 47 confirmed kills in conditions that should have made shooting impossible. He survived Chosin when 70% of his battalion didn't. He made it home, trained new snipers for 30 years, and died in 2006 at age 78. Nathaniel's finger moved to the trigger. So yes, it worked. The rifle cracked. 400 yards away, the coyote dropped mid-stride and didn't get back up. Nathaniel worked the bolt, ejecting the spent brass. He caught it before it hit the ground and handed it to Elena. That's yours now. First lesson, keep it. Elena held the warm brass in her small hand. It smelled like burned powder and metal. What's the lesson? She asked. Nathaniel looked at her with eyes that were the same gray-blue as her own. Eyes that had seen things in Mogadishu and the Gulf that he would never talk about. Eyes that held everything her mother's death had taught him about impermanence and the importance of passing on what mattered. The lesson is that the world is going to tell you what's possible and what's not possible. It's going to draw lines and say you can't cross them. Men will tell you, women will tell you, the whole damn universe will line up to explain your limitations. He stood up, slinging the rifle. But mathematics doesn't care about opinions. Physics doesn't care about what people think. The wind doesn't care who's listening. If you learn to read what's actually there, instead of what people say should be there, you'll do things they say can't be done. Like what? Nathaniel looked out across the valley. The sun was setting, the wind was picking up. Winter was coming, and the ranch work was never finished. And his daughter was growing up in a world that would try very hard to make her small. Like anything you want, he said. Alaska, 2024, present. Elena opened her eyes. Minute 7. The memory had taken maybe 30 seconds. The wind hadn't changed. The enemy sniper hadn't fired again. Everything was exactly as it had been, except now she had clarity. Her father had taught her this. Not just the acoustic wind reading, not just the mathematics of extreme range shooting. He'd taught her how to be still when stillness was the hardest thing in the world. How to wait when waiting felt like dying. How to choose the mission over yourself. In the crevice behind her, she heard Ray's voices, muffled by distance and wind, but urgent. Someone was arguing. Probably the lieutenant. Probably demanding that she pull back, abort, save herself. She didn't move. Minute 11. The enemy fired again. This round impacted the ice shelf 3 meters to her left. Not overhead anymore. Lateral. He'd corrected his aim. The impact sent a shower of ice fragments into the air. Some of them hit her. Sharp edges of frozen water traveling at high velocity, propelled by the shockwave of a .338 Lapua Magnum round hitting solid ice. One fragment, maybe the size of a quarter, sliced across Elena's left cheek just below her eye. She felt the impact, felt the warm blood start to flow, felt it freeze almost immediately in the -34-degree air, creating a line of ice on her face that pulled at her skin. She didn't move. In the crevice, someone was shouting. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Panic. Fear. The sound of men watching someone die and being unable to stop it. Minute 15. Her internal monologue, the voice that had been silent for most of her adult life, trained into submission by years of discipline, suddenly spoke. He's going to hit you before the window opens. Elena's response was immediate and certain. I know. Then why are you still here? Because if I move, I lose the position. If I lose the position, I have to recalculate everything. New angle, new wind reading, new ballistic solution. That's another 2 hours. Corporal Pierce doesn't have 2 hours. He dies if I move. So you're choosing to die instead? I'm choosing the math that works. The math says I have a 12% chance of being hit with each shot the enemy takes. 88% chance I survive each one. Pierce has 0% chance if I abort. The equation is simple. That's not how human beings think. I'm not thinking like a human being right now. I'm thinking like a bullet. The internal voice went quiet. Elena adjusted her scope by 1/10 of a mil. The barrel temperature had dropped another 2 degrees. The propellant in her remaining cartridge would burn slightly slower in the cold. Muzzle velocity would decrease by approximately 18 feet per second. That meant the bullet would arrive 0.12 seconds later than her initial calculation. That meant it would drop an additional 1.4 meters. She dialed the correction. Minute 16 brought another memory. Uninvited but insistent. Fort Benning, Georgia, 2019. 5 years ago. Sniper School. Week 3. 43 candidates had started. 31 men, 12 women. By week 3, the class was down to 19. 8 men, 3 women. The rest had failed land navigation, failed physical fitness tests, failed to maintain the mental discipline required to lie motionless for 8 hours watching a target that might never appear. Elena was still there. Not because the training was easy, it wasn't. Because she'd been training for this her entire life without knowing it. The qualification chute was at 1,000 meters, 5 rounds, acceptable group size, 9 inches. Anything larger was a failure. Elena settled into position behind her rifle, a standard Army M24, not the custom weapon she would later carry. The wind was variable, 15 miles per hour gusting to 25, switchy, difficult. She fired her 5 rounds in 6 minutes. When the range officer called the results, her group measured 4 inches. Dead center, perfect elevation, perfect windage. 5 holes you could cover with a playing card. The candidate next to her, a staff sergeant named Jackson, 6'2", former infantry, 12 years in the Army, looked at her target, then at his own. His group was 9 inches, barely passing. They lowered the standards, Jackson said, not to her, to the air, to the other male candidates standing nearby. That's the only reason she's here. Political correctness, quotas. They make it easier for women and pretend it's the same test. Elena said nothing. She field-stripped her rifle and began cleaning it. Jackson kept talking. I mean, look at that group. 4 inches? At 1,000 meters in this wind? Come on, that's not skill. That's luck. Or the range officer giving her a pass. The instructor, Master Sergeant Roy Atkins, age 59, combat veteran of the Gulf War and Somalia, a man who had worked with Nathaniel Ashford in Mogadishu in 1993, walked over. Candidate Jackson, Atkins said. His voice was quiet. That was worse than yelling. What was your group size? 9 inches, Master Sergeant. And what was candidate Ashford's group size? Jackson hesitated. 4 inches, Master Sergeant. So let me understand this. You shot a 9-inch group. She shot a 4-inch group. And your conclusion is that her standards were lower than yours? Master Sergeant, I'm not saying. Math doesn't care what you're saying, candidate. Math is binary. 4 is smaller than 9. Smaller groups mean better shooting. Better shooting means higher standards, not lower. Do you need me to explain this more slowly? The other candidates had gone very quiet. Jackson's face was red. No, Master Sergeant. Outstanding. Then stop wasting oxygen on opinions and start focusing on making your groups smaller. Atkins turned to walk away, then paused. And Jackson, if you're still here at graduation, you'll finish somewhere around 7th or 8th in the class ranking. Candidate Ashford will finish in the top 3. When that happens, I want you to remember this conversation and think very carefully about the difference between standards and your ability to meet them. Jackson washed out in week 5. Failed stress fire drill. Elena graduated 3rd in the class overall, behind 2 men who had both been shooting competitively since childhood, ahead of everyone else. At the graduation ceremony, Atkins pulled her aside. Your father saved my life in Mogadishu, he said. I was 21 years old, first combat deployment, thought I was invincible. We got pinned down in the Bakara market. Your father was on overwatch. He put down 3 hostiles in 4 seconds from 1,400 meters out. Gave us the window we needed to extract. I owe him everything. Elena didn't know what to say to that. I'm not telling you this because I gave you any special treatment, Atkins continued. I didn't. Every score you earned clean. I'm telling you this because you're about to walk into rooms full of people who will assume you didn't earn it. Who will decide before you open your mouth that you're a diversity hire, a political statement, a social experiment? And I want you to know something. What's that, Master Sergeant? Your father taught you how to shoot. I can see his technique in everything you do. But what you have, the ability to shut out noise and focus on what matters, that's not something anyone taught you. That's who you are. Don't let anyone take that from you. I won't, Master Sergeant. Atkins looked at her the way someone looks at a piece of equipment they know will perform when it matters most. I know you won't, he said. That's why I'm not worried about you. Alaska, 2024, present, minute 19. The enemy fired again, fourth round since her miss. This one hit close, very close, maybe 1 meter to her right. Ice exploded upward. Fragments pelted her suit, her pack, her rifle. One piece hit her scope, leaving a small scratch on the objective lens that wouldn't affect her sight picture, but would live there forever as a reminder of how close she'd come. The mathematical probability of the next round hitting her was increasing with each shot. The enemy was refining his aim, walking his fire with the patience of a professional. The next shot would be within half a meter. The one after that would connect. Elena knew this, accepted this, and stayed exactly where she was. Because in approximately 2 minutes, the wind would shift. The mid-altitude layer would slow. The window would open, and she would have one chance to make this right. Minute 20. Her acoustic recorder picked up the frequency change before she consciously registered it. The mid-level wind was dropping. 58 hertz down to 55, down to 52. The window was opening early, 19 minutes instead of 21. The pattern was shifting. That happens sometimes with mountain winds. The thermal dynamics changed as the storm evolved. She had maybe 20 seconds before the window closed again. Elena's hands moved with the speed of unconscious competence. Muscle memory built over 5,000 trigger pulls. Her breathing slowed. 6 breaths per minute down to 4. Down to 2. Her heart rate dropped. 52 beats per minute down to 48. Down to 44. She placed her finger on the trigger. The adjustments were already made. 2. 1 mil left for wind compensation. 0.4 mils up for the barrel temperature and velocity loss. Spin drift calculated. Coriolis calculated. Gravity calculated. Everything that could be known, she knew. Everything that couldn't be known, she accepted. This was the moment her father had prepared her for without ever saying it explicitly. The moment where mathematics ended and faith began. Not faith in God or destiny or luck. Faith in the purity of repetition. Faith that 5,000 perfect trigger pulls would produce a 5,001st perfect trigger pull. Faith that somewhere between heartbeats, between fear and certainty, between the world as it was and the world as it could be, there existed a moment of absolute clarity where everything impossible became simple. Elena found that moment. She exhaled half a breath and held it. Her finger moved. The trigger broke at exactly 4.25 pounds of pressure. The rifle spoke. The recoil was enormous. 37 foot-pounds of energy driving into her shoulder like a hammer. But she'd absorbed this recoil so many times that her body knew how to become part of it, how to ride it instead of fighting it. She didn't blink. She watched. Second one. The bullet crossed the first 500 meters, still accelerating, still climbing, the rifling imparting 270,000 rotations per minute to stabilize its flight. Second 2. Passing through the ground-level wind layer, 18 miles per hour, right to left. The bullet drifted 0.4 meters left, exactly as calculated. Second 3. The bullet reached its apex, the highest point of its trajectory, roughly 800 meters downrange. From here, gravity would pull it down in an arc that would drop it 62 meters below her original line of sight by the time it reached the target. Second 4. Entering the mid-altitude layer, the layer she could only hear, the layer that had betrayed her on the first shot. But this time the layer was quiet. This time the window was open. The bullet passed through with minimal deflection, maybe 0.2 meters, within her margin of error. Second 5. Spin drift pulling the bullet 4.2 meters right. Coriolis effect pulling it 1.1 meters left. Net drift 3.1 meters right. She'd held 2.1 mils left to compensate, which at this range translated to exactly 3.2 meters of correction. The mathematics were working. Second 5.6. The bullet entered the final wind layer. High altitude, turbulent, unpredictable. This was the part she couldn't control. This was where the universe decided whether her calculations were sufficient or whether chaos would win. Second 5.8. Through her thermal scope, Elena saw the enemy sniper's signature. A bright white human shape against the cold gray of rock. He was in position, scanning, looking for her through his own optics. The bullet arrived. The thermal signature jerked violently. Not a flinch, not a reaction. A physical impact that transferred kinetic energy, 2,800 foot-pounds of force, into soft tissue and bone. The shape's arms spread wide. The body tilted backward. Momentum carried it sideways, off balance, beyond recovery. The signature slid from the edge of the rock shelf and dropped below the ridgeline. The bright thermal glow faded as the body fell into shadow. Then, nothing. Absolute nothing. Elena kept watching. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. No return fire. No movement. No secondary heat source moving to recover the body or take up the position. The valley was silent except for the wind. And then, from 60 meters behind her, a voice. Raw and cracked and barely above a whisper. Master Sergeant Cole Merrick's voice. Hit. Confirmed hit. Target down. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody in the crevice made a sound. Then someone started crying. Not sobbing, just the quiet tears of men who thought they were going to die and just learned they might live. Nobody cheered. Nobody shouted. This wasn't a football game or a training exercise. This was 9 men who had spent 38 hours in a frozen hell watching their friend die by degrees. And a woman they'd never met had just given them a chance to see home again. Captain Garrett Blackwood sat down heavily on the frozen ground. He put his hands on his knees, and he breathed. Just breathed. The first full breath he'd taken in 38 hours. Lieutenant Bryce Holden sat against the rock wall with his mouth open. He looked like someone had just explained a magic trick, and he still didn't understand how it worked. Corporal Landon Pierce, delirious with fever and infection, opened his eyes and looked at Merrick. Did she do it? Pierce's voice was barely audible. Merrick pressed his blood-soaked hands harder against the wound that had been killing Pierce for a day and a half. Tears cut tracks through the grime on his face. Yeah, Landon, Merrick said. She did it. 60 meters away, Elena Ashford pulled back from her scope. She rolled onto her side and reached for her notebook. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She opened to a clean page and began writing. Shot number 2. Distance, 3,218 meters. Wind compensation, 2.1 mils left. Temperature, minus 34 Celsius. Barrel temperature, minus 8 Celsius. Estimated muzzle velocity, 3,150 feet per second. Time of flight, 5.8 seconds. Result, confirmed hit. Then she added one more line. Not standard documentation, not tactical data, just truth. For Mom, who taught Dad to teach me. For Dad, who listened. For Gunny Tobias Kincaid, who started this chain in Korea 74 years ago. And for everyone who said impossible. She closed the notebook. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the enemy spotter retreating. Thermal signature pulling back over the ridgeline, abandoning the position, abandoning any thought of recovering the body. They were afraid now. One bullet, one single .408 Cheyenne tactical round fired through a blizzard, across a distance most people couldn't accurately describe, had collapsed their entire tactical advantage. Not because of the damage it did, because of what it proved. There was no safe distance anymore. 14 minutes after the shot, the enemy was gone. Confirmed by thermal imaging, the high ground that had been a death trap for 38 hours was now empty. 3 hours later, two Black Hawk helicopters punched through the storm. The pilots flew in conditions that violated every safety protocol in the book. But they flew anyway, because 9 Americans needed extraction and the weather window wouldn't last. They loaded Corporal Pierce first, then Specialist Owen, then the walking wounded. The rest boarded under their own power. Men who had been sitting in frozen hell for 38 hours, who had watched their friend turn gray with infection, who had been certain they would die on this mountain. They walked to the helicopters like men who couldn't quite believe they were allowed to live. Elena walked 30 meters behind the group, alone. Nobody had invited her to walk with them, and she hadn't asked. This was standard. This was how it always went. She'd done her job. They'd survived. The mathematics had worked. The rest, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the bonds formed in shared suffering, those belonged to them. She carried her rifle across her back and her notebook in her chest pocket and moved through the snow like she'd been born in it, which, in a way, she had been. Lieutenant Holden stopped walking. He turned around and watched her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He waited for her to catch up. "Staff Sergeant," he said when she reached him. "Lieutenant, I need to say something." Elena looked at him. Those gray-blue eyes that had stared through a scope for 2 hours while death walked rounds toward her skull. Eyes that showed nothing but the same flat calm they'd shown when she arrived. "Go ahead." Holden had rehearsed this. He'd been rehearsing it for the last 3 hours, trying to find words that matched the magnitude of what he'd witnessed. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For what I said when you arrived. When I called the shot impossible. I was wrong." Elena's expression didn't change. "Yes." Holden blinked. He'd expected her to be gracious, to say it was okay, that anyone could have made the same mistake, that the conditions were extreme. She gave him none of that. "I was wrong," he said again, emphasizing it, making sure she heard. "I know. I need you to understand that I wasn't questioning your ability as a woman. I was questioning the physics of the shot itself." "Were you?" The question hung in the frozen air between them. "I'd like to think so," Holden said carefully. "Don't think about it," Elena said. "Just answer. If Staff Sergeant Calloway had walked into that crevice instead of me, 6'2", 220 pounds, 12 years in special operations, would you have said, 'Impossible'?" 5 seconds of silence. In combat, 5 seconds is an eternity. Holden's face flushed red from the jawline up, not from cold, from the sudden, inescapable recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. "No," he said quietly, "I probably wouldn't have." Elena nodded, not in anger, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. "You misjudged the math, Lieutenant, and you misjudged the math because you misjudged me, and you misjudged me because of something that has nothing to do with ballistics or wind or physics." "I know." "I'm not angry," Elena said. "I stopped being angry about this a long time ago. But I want you to remember something." "What's that?" "The next time you see someone who doesn't match the picture in your head, someone who's too young, too small, too female, too anything, remember this conversation. Remember what it cost you." Holden's voice came out smaller than he expected. "What did it cost me?" "Credibility. Every man in that crevice heard you say, 'Impossible,' and every one of them watched me prove you wrong. That's a story they'll tell for the rest of their careers. And you'll be in it, not as the villain, just as the man who was wrong." She walked past him toward the helicopter. At the door, she paused without turning around. "Apology accepted, by the way." Then she climbed aboard and disappeared into the darkness of the Black Hawk's interior. Holden stood in the snow for a long time. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from the realization that he'd just learned more about leadership in 90 seconds than he'd learned in 4 years at West Point. He pulled out his phone, barely any battery left, and typed a note to himself. Just one line. He would look at it every morning for the next 3 years. Check your assumptions, then check them again, then throw them out and look at what's actually there. The flight back to Eielson Air Force Base took 11 hours with refueling stops. Elena slept through most of it. She'd learned to sleep anywhere, a skill that had nothing to do with the Army and everything to do with growing up in a house in Wyoming where the heat went out every January and you either learned to sleep through the cold or you didn't sleep at all. The debrief started 4 hours after they landed. Elena sat across a table from people who wanted to understand what she'd done. Colonel Reynolds, age 64, base commander, Gulf War veteran. Major Brennan, her program director from Fort Carson, who'd flown in specifically for this. Dr. Margaret Sterling, the ballistics engineer who ran computer simulations for the Extreme Long Range program. Staff Sergeant Ashford, Colonel Reynolds said, "Do you understand what you've done?" Elena looked at him with eyes that hadn't slept enough and a face that still had dried blood on it from the ice fragment that had cut her cheek. "I completed my assigned mission, sir. You made a shot that most people in this building would have called impossible. Most people in most buildings would say that, sir. And you disagree?" Elena folded her hands on the table, calm, still, like she was discussing the weather instead of an engagement that would end up in classified briefings at the Pentagon. "Impossible means the physics doesn't allow it, sir. The physics allowed it, so it wasn't impossible. It was just difficult." Dr. Sterling leaned forward. She had a tablet in front of her displaying graphs and trajectory models that looked like abstract art. "Staff Sergeant, I ran your shot through our most advanced ballistic simulation. Full 6-degree of freedom modeling with stochastic wind inputs. I ran 10,000 Monte Carlo iterations using the conditions you reported. And the computer gave you a 3.2% probability of success." Elena didn't react. Sterling continued, 3.2%. That means if you took that exact shot 100 times in those exact conditions, you would miss 96 or 97 times. You did it on your second attempt. So either you were extraordinarily lucky or your wind reading methodology, including this acoustic technique, provided you with data accuracy that exceeds our modeling capability. Which do you think it is, Doctor? Sterling looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was the smile of someone who's just found a puzzle piece they didn't know was missing. I think luck doesn't write 4 pages of ballistic calculations in a notebook while lying on an ice shelf under enemy fire. I think your methodology works, and I think we need to understand it. Colonel Reynolds cleared his throat. Staff Sergeant, where did you learn the acoustic wind reading technique? My father, sir. Your father was military? Marines, sniper, Gulf War, Mogadishu. Reynolds sat up slightly. What was his name? Colonel Nathaniel Ashford, sir. Retired. The room went very quiet. Reynolds's face had gone pale. Nathaniel Ashford was your father? Yes, sir. I served with your father in Mogadishu, 1993. I was a captain then. Your father was on overwatch during the Bakara market engagement. He saved 14 Marines that day with 3 shots from 1,400 meters out. I was one of them. Elena said nothing. This happens sometimes. Her father had served for 26 years, had deployed to 2 wars, had trained hundreds of Marines. Everywhere she went, someone knew him. Reynolds seemed to be processing something. And he taught you the acoustic technique? Yes, sir. He learned it from his mentor, Master Sergeant Tobias Kincaid. Chosin Reservoir, 1950. Kincaid, Reynolds repeated. Then his face changed. Gunny Kincaid died in 2006. I was at his funeral. He was my instructor at Scout Sniper School in 1984. Elena met his eyes. I know, sir. Then that means Reynolds stopped, looked at Dr. Sterling, back to Elena. That means there are only two people alive who know that technique. You and your father. Yes, sir. And you just used it to accomplish something our best computer simulations said had a 96.8% chance of failure. Yes, sir. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. He looked like someone who just watched the world rearrange itself into a new shape. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star, he said. Not for the shot, for staying in position under direct enemy fire while a hostile sniper walked rounds onto your location. That's not marksmanship, Staff Sergeant. That's valor. Elena's expression didn't change. Respectfully, sir, I'd prefer the commendation go on my record without a public ceremony. Why? Because ceremonies create narratives, sir, and narratives get distorted. The shot was mathematics. The decision to stay was mathematics. I'd rather the data speak for itself. Reynolds studied her. The data speaks pretty loudly, Staff Sergeant. Yes, sir, that's sufficient. The debrief ended 90 minutes later. Elena walked out of the room with orders to return to Fort Carson within 72 hours. Major Brennan would be developing a training module based on her acoustic wind technique. She would teach it to the entire ELR unit. In the hallway outside, she almost walked past Captain Blackwood. Staff Sergeant. Elena stopped, turned. Captain. Blackwood looked older than he had on the mountain. The kind of aging that happens when stress releases and the body finally admits how close it came to breaking. I wanted to tell you something, he said. Sir, Corporal Pierce is out of surgery. Full recovery expected. The doctor said another 2 hours in that cold and we would have lost the leg. Maybe lost him. Elena nodded once. I'm glad he's going to be okay, sir. I wrote a letter, Blackwood continued, unofficial, for your service record. I sent it to Major Brennan. Sir, you didn't need to. Yes, I did. Blackwood's voice was firm. Because someday, someone is going to look at your file. They're going to see the numbers. 3,218 meters, second round hit, minus 34 Celsius. And they're going to think they understand what happened. They won't? No, because the after-action report doesn't capture the part that matters. It doesn't capture the 21 minutes you spent on that ice shelf while rounds impacted around you. It doesn't capture the fact that you chose 9 strangers over your own life and then documented it like a science experiment. Blackwood took a step closer. What you did up there wasn't just extraordinary shooting, Staff Sergeant. It was a decision that most people, most trained soldiers, wouldn't have the steel to make. You deserve to have that on record. Not the version that fits in a data table. The version that's true. Elena's throat felt tight. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for everything. Blackwood walked away. Elena stood alone in the empty hallway of Eielson Air Force Base, 4,000 miles from Wyoming, 72 hours from returning to Fort Carson, and for the first time since she'd pulled that trigger, she felt something crack in the armor she'd built around herself. Not breaking, just cracking. Just enough to let something in. She pulled out her satellite phone, the one she carried on every deployment, the one with exactly one number programmed into it. She dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. On the 6th ring, her father answered. Yeah, one word. That was Nathaniel Ashford's standard greeting. One word that meant, I'm here. I'm listening. Talk to me. Dad, it's me. I know. Silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that exists between two people who've had this exact conversation 100 times in 100 different ways. I made a shot, Elena said. How far? 3,218. Pause. Not a normal pause. A Nathaniel Ashford pause. The kind that meant he was processing something significant and deciding how few words he could use to address it. Meters? Meters. The pause stretched longer. Elena could hear him breathing, could hear what sounded like a chair creaking. The old leather recliner in the living room of the ranch house, the one he'd had since before she was born. How close was the first shot? His voice was careful, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been fear or pride or both, wound so tightly together they couldn't be separated. 2 meters. Elena heard something she'd heard maybe 5 times in her entire life. Nathaniel Ashford exhaled hard through his nose. Not a sigh, not a gasp, just air leaving his lungs in a way that said words weren't sufficient for what he was feeling. 2 meters at 3,218. His voice was quiet. In what conditions? Blizzard, -34. Crosswinds, 65 to 85. Another long pause. Elena. Yes, sir? Your mother would have found better words for this. She always had better words. I'm looking for them, but all I've got is this. That's not just good shooting. That's something else entirely. Elena felt tears start to form. She blinked them back. I used your technique, Dad. The acoustic reading, just like you taught me. Kincaid's technique. I just passed it on. You did more than pass it on. You made it mine. Silence on the line, but it was full, dense with everything her father couldn't say and everything she already knew. Call me when you're stateside, Nathaniel said finally. I will. 6th ring. 6th ring. The line went dead. Elena stood in the hallway holding the phone against her chest. Outside, through a window, she could see snow falling. Different snow than Alaska. Lighter, less angry. But wind was wind, no matter where it blew. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, between impossible and done, between the daughter she'd been and the soldier she'd become, Elena Ashford understood that she'd just done something that would follow her for the rest of her life. Not the shot itself, the choice to take it. 3 weeks after Alaska, Elena Ashford stopped sleeping. It didn't happen all at once. Sleep didn't abandon her like a light switching off. It retreated slowly, like water draining from a basin. First she was waking at 3 in the morning instead of 5, then 2, then midnight. Then she stopped falling asleep at all until 1 in the morning, only to wake 40 minutes later with her heart hammering and her hands gripping the sheets like she was holding a trigger that wouldn't break. She didn't dream about the shot. That would have made sense. That would have been clean. Something she could identify and address. The shot had been mathematics. The shot had worked. There was nothing in the shot to fear. She dreamed about the waiting. 21 minutes on an ice shelf while bullets walked toward her position. 21 minutes of lying perfectly still while her lizard brain screamed, run, and her conscious mind said, stay, and the enemy closed the distance 1 round at a time. 3 meters away. Overhead, close enough to feel the pressure wave. In the dream, a voice kept asking the same question. He's going to hit you before the window opens, isn't he? And Elena would answer, every time, with the same cold certainty. Yes, probably, but Pierce dies if I move. That was the part that woke her up. Not the fear of dying, the acceptance of it. The pure, crystalline clarity of a decision made by mathematics instead of survival instinct. She had chosen the mission over her own life with the same calm she used to calculate spindrift. And now, 3 weeks later, the part of her brain designed to keep her alive was screaming about what she'd done. Fort Carson, Colorado, morning range qualification. Staff Sergeant Trent Calloway watched Elena through his spotting scope and frowned. They'd been shooting partners for 3 years. He knew her groups the way a musician knows a familiar song. Tight, consistent, perfect. Today something was wrong. 1,800 meters, standard qualification distance. Elena should have been able to do this in her sleep. Her first group was acceptable, 3 rounds within a 6-inch circle. Her second group opened up to 9 inches. Still passing, but not Elena's standard. Her third group, she pulled the 4th shot. Not by much, maybe an inch of trigger movement instead of the clean, straight-back press that was as natural to her as breathing. But Calloway saw through his scope. Saw the shot impact 8 inches left of her call. Elena never pulled shots. He waited until they were in the armory cleaning weapons. The room smelled like gun oil and solvent. Mechanical. Safe. Ghost, he said quietly. You pulled one. Elena didn't look up from her barrel. I know. You never pull shots. I know. So what's going on? Nothing. Calloway set down his cleaning rod. He turned on the bench to face her fully. Elena's hands were steady as they always were. Surgeon steady. Machinist steady. But her jaw was tight, and he could see a muscle jumping just below her ear. How long since you slept? He asked. Elena's hands stopped moving. Just for a second, then resumed. I'm sleeping. How long, Ghost? Since Alaska. The admission hung in the air between them like smoke. Calloway had been in the Army for 14 years. He'd seen this before. Different triggers, different people, same pattern. Have you talked to anyone? I'm talking to you. I mean professionally, behavioral health. Elena's hands kept working, methodical, precise. The conversation was over as far as she was concerned. But Calloway wasn't Nathaniel Ashford. He didn't communicate in silences. He pushed. Ghost, listen to me. What you did up there, lying on that shelf while rounds impacted around you, that's not just a ballistic event. That's a trauma event. Your body was in a kill zone for 21 minutes, and you overrode every survival instinct you have. That doesn't just go away because the mission succeeded. I'm fine. You pulled a shot at 1,800 meters. You're not fine. Elena set down the barrel. She looked at Calloway directly, and for just a moment her mask slipped enough for him to see what was underneath. Not fear, not weakness, exhaustion. The bone-deep fatigue of a mind that wouldn't stop running calculations on a problem that had no solution. If I go to behavioral health, it goes on my record, she said. So I'm the only woman in this unit. I'm the first woman to make a confirmed engagement past 3,000 meters. If I show up on a psych referral list 3 weeks after the biggest shot of my career, what story gets told? Calloway opened his mouth to argue, closed it, because he knew she was right, and he hated that she was right. He hated that in 2024, in the most advanced military on Earth, a woman seeking mental health support after a combat event would still be filtered through a lens that a man wouldn't face. So what are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to keep shooting until it stops. That's not a plan, Ghost. That's avoidance. It's what I've got. She reassembled her rifle, racked it, and walked out of the armory without another word. Calloway sat there for a long time, staring at the bench where she'd been sitting. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call he knew Elena would be furious about. Major Brennan, it's Calloway. We need to talk about Ashford. The next morning, Major Wyatt Brennan called Elena into his office. She knew the moment she saw his face. The way he was sitting, leaning forward on his desk instead of back in his chair. The way his eyes tracked her from the door to the seat across from him. Calloway called you, she said. Sit down, Staff Sergeant. Sir, with respect, sit down. Elena sat. Brennan was 52 years old, barrel-chested, gray at the temples. He'd commanded special forces teams in 3 countries before taking over the extreme long-range program. He didn't waste words, and he didn't play games. You're not sleeping, he said. It's manageable. You pulled a shot on the range yesterday. 1 shot, 1 inch. 1 inch at 1,800 is 10 inches at 3,600. You know that better than anyone in this building. Brennan's voice was even. No anger, no judgment, just fact. I'm not pulling you from the program, and I'm not sending you to behavioral health against your will. That's not how I operate. Then what, sir? I'm sending you home. Elena blinked. Home? Wyoming, your father's ranch. 2 weeks, mandatory leave, non-negotiable. Sir, the training module, the acoustic wind assessment, Dr. Sterling is waiting for. Dr. Sterling can wait. Your brain can't. Brennan pulled a set of leave papers from his drawer, already filled out. You're running on fumes, Ashford. And the problem isn't your body. It's that you made a decision on that mountain that your conscious mind is fine with and your subconscious mind is screaming about. He slid the papers across the desk. You need to go somewhere quiet enough to hear both sides of that argument. And you need to do it before your body makes the decision for you. So you're going. That's not a suggestion. Elena looked at the papers. Something in her chest loosened slightly, like a knot pulled so tight it had forgotten it was once loose. Okay, she said. Okay? Yes, sir, okay. Brennan nodded. One more thing. Sir? Calloway didn't betray you. He protected you. There's a difference. The same difference between staying on an ice shelf because you're stubborn and staying because you've calculated the odds. Intent matters. Elena took the papers. She stood. At the door, she paused. Major? Yeah? Thank you for not making this about what I am. Brennan looked at her with eyes that had seen enough combat to know that courage wore 1,000 different faces. What you are is one of the 12 best shooters in the United States Army, he said. What you're experiencing is what happens to people who do extraordinary things under extraordinary pressure. There's no gender on that, Ashford. There's just the human brain doing what human brains do when they're pushed past normal limits. Yes, sir. Go home, see your father, shoot some coyotes, let your brain process what happened. Come back when you're ready. The drive from Colorado Springs to Cody, Wyoming took 9 hours. Elena did it in one stretch, stopping only for gas and a bathroom break at a truck stop in Casper. The landscape changed as she drove north, from the populated corridor along I-25 to the empty high plains of Wyoming. Fewer buildings, fewer people, more sky. By the time she pulled into the ranch at 6:30 in the evening, the sun was already dropping behind the Absaroka Mountains. Her father's truck was parked in its usual spot next to the barn. The porch light was on. Nathaniel opened the door before she knocked. He looked the same as he always did, weathered, still, like something carved from the landscape itself instead of merely living on it. 62 years old, but he moved like 50. Ranching kept you strong, or it killed you. No middle ground. Didn't expect you, he said. Didn't plan it. He looked at her, really looked at her the way only a parent can, reading years of data in a single glance. The dark circles under her eyes, the way she held her shoulders just slightly higher than normal. The tells that most people wouldn't see, but that Nathaniel Ashford could read like wind through grass. How long? He asked. 2 weeks. How bad? Elena felt something crack. Just a hairline fracture in the armor, but it was enough. I pulled a shot, Dad. Nathaniel's face didn't change, but something happened in his eyes. For Nathaniel Ashford, who had trained his daughter to shoot from age 9, who had built her foundation on precision and consistency, hearing that she'd pulled a shot was like hearing a doctor say the patient's heart had stopped. He stepped aside. Your room's the same. The house smelled like coffee and wood smoke and leather, and something else Elena couldn't name, but that her body recognized before her mind could process it. Home. Not the word, the feeling underneath the word. They ate leftover stew at the kitchen table. Didn't talk much. The silence between them was the same silence that had filled this kitchen for 23 years since Elena's mother died. Not empty silence, full silence. The kind that exists between two people who have each other's frequency dialed in so precisely that words are often unnecessary interference. After dinner, Elena washed the dishes. Nathaniel dried. They moved around the kitchen with the unconscious coordination of a team that had run this drill 1,000 times. Dad, Elena said, her hands in the soapy water. Yeah? I can't sleep. Nathaniel set down the towel. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. Not defensive, just still. Since when? Since Alaska. He didn't ask what happened in Alaska. He'd already done the math. His daughter had gone to Alaska with a rifle and come back unable to sleep. The details were operational. The cause was human. How bad? He asked again. Bad enough that I'm pulling shots. For Nathaniel, this was critical intel. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Elena dried her hands and sat across from him. Tell me, he said. And Elena, who hadn't told anyone the full truth, not Calloway, not Brennan, not the debrief board, sat at her father's kitchen table and told him everything. Not the ballistics, he knew the ballistics. The other part. The 21 minutes on the ice shelf while rounds impacted around her position. The mathematical calculation, 12% chance of being hit per shot. The decision that 12% was acceptable because Pierce's leg was turning gray and 48 hours wasn't available. The part where she chose the mission over herself and felt nothing in the moment. No fear, no hesitation, no bargaining with God or fate or the universe. Just the pure, cold clarity of a decision made by mathematics. And the part that came after, the part where her body caught up, where the adrenaline debt came due, where the ancient animal inside her skull started screaming about what she'd done and wouldn't stop. Nathaniel listened to all of it, every word. His face didn't change. His body didn't move. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without performance, without the need to fill silence with reaction. When she finished, the kitchen was so quiet, Elena could hear the old clock on the wall ticking, each second marked and measured and irreversible. Elena, Nathaniel said finally. Yeah? You're not broken. I know. No, listen to me. His voice was firm, not loud, firm. You're not broken. You did something that required turning off the part of yourself that exists to keep you alive. And now that part is turning back on, and it's angry. That's not damage. That's the system working. Elena felt tears start to form. She blinked them back. Then why can't I sleep? Because sleeping means letting go of control. And your brain has decided that letting go of control almost got you killed. So it won't let you. How do I fix it? Nathaniel looked at her across the table, and in his eyes, those quiet, steady, unyielding eyes that had seen firefights in Mogadishu and the long, slow death of his wife from cancer, Elena saw something she'd rarely seen before. Fear. Not for himself, never for himself, for her. The kind of fear that a man who has already lost his wife carries like a stone in his chest every day. The fear of losing the only thing left that makes the world make sense. You don't fix it, Elena. You walk through it. That sounds like something Mom would say. Nathaniel's face changed, just barely. A shift in the muscles around his mouth that on anyone else would have been invisible, but on Nathaniel Ashford was an earthquake. It is something your mother said. His voice was steady, but carrying stress it was never designed for. 3 days before her last surgery, I told her I was scared, and she held my hand and said, Nathaniel, you don't go around the hard things. You go through them, and I'll be waiting on the other side. He looked down at his hands, rancher's hands, scarred from barbed wire and machinery in 62 years of hard work. I've been looking for the right words for 23 years, Elena. Those are the closest I've found, and they're not even mine. They're your mother's. Everything good I taught you came from her first. Elena reached across the table. She put her hand on her father's hand. Nathaniel Ashford, who hadn't hugged his daughter since she was 6 years old, who communicated in 6-ring phone calls and 1-word texts, who had driven 2 hours in silence to watch her enlist without saying a word for or against, turned his hand over and held his daughter's hand. They sat like that for a long time. The stew pot was still on the stove. The clock kept ticking. Outside, the wind was picking up. Elena could hear it shifting against the north wall of the house. 32 miles per hour gusting to 40, west-northwest. She couldn't help it. She always read the wind. But for the first time in 3 weeks, the calculation didn't mean anything. It was just wind, just air moving over land. No bullet, no trajectory. No one's life depending on the accuracy of her reading. Just wind. Nathaniel squeezed her hand once, then let go. He stood up, took his coffee mug to the sink, rinsed it, and placed it upside down on the drying rack. "Range tomorrow," he said. "Range tomorrow," Elena confirmed. 500 rounds. 500. I'll load tonight. He walked to the reloading bench in the back room. Elena heard the familiar sounds, the press, the powder measure, the gentle click of primers being seated. The rhythm of it was as steady as a heartbeat, as certain as mathematics. She sat at the kitchen table and closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to listen. The wind against the wall, the press in the back room, the clock on the mantel. And somewhere deep, beneath the calculations, in the discipline, and the armor she'd built over 29 years of being underestimated, the faintest pulse of something her father had just given a name to. The thing her mother said before her last surgery. The thing that meant going through instead of going around. Elena opened her eyes. She pulled out her notebook, the same notebook she'd carried on the mountain, and turned to a blank page. She didn't write ballistic data. She wrote 2 words: go through. Then she closed the notebook and went to bed. She slept 5 hours that first night, the most she'd slept in 3 weeks. The next 10 days followed a pattern. Elena and Nathaniel would wake at 5. Coffee on the table, black, no sugar. Then out to the range by 6. 500 rounds a day. Not at extreme distance, not at targets shaped like men. Just coffee cans and steel plates set between 200 and 600 yards across the ranch land. No data collection, no wind charts, no calculations written in notebooks. Just the rifle, the target, and the space between. On the 5th day, something shifted. They were on the north fence line, taking turns shooting at a steel plate 400 yards out. Elena had just put 3 rounds dead center. She lowered the rifle and looked at her father. "Dad, why did you really teach me to shoot?" Nathaniel lowered his binoculars. He squinted at her the way he squinted at weather, trying to read what was coming. "Coyotes," he said. "No, I mean, really." He was quiet for a long time. The wind pushed across the grass in waves. The mountains stood silent in the distance. "Your mother asked me to," Nathaniel said finally. Elena went very still. "What?" 3 days before she died. She couldn't talk much by then, but she grabbed my hand and she said, "Nathaniel, teach our daughter to be lethal." I thought she meant tough. I thought she meant strong. But your mother was more precise than that. She said lethal. And I thought about it for a long time after she was gone, and I realized what she meant. What did she mean? She meant capable. She meant give that girl something the world can't take away from her. Not beauty, though your mother had that. Not charm, she had that too. Not kindness, she had all 3. She meant a skill so deep and so real that no one could ever look at you and decide you were less than what you are. Elena's hands were trembling, not from cold, from the sudden, staggering weight of understanding something she'd carried her whole life without knowing its origin. "You never told me that. You never asked." "I'm asking now." Nathaniel set down the binoculars. He turned to face her fully, something he almost never did during conversation. Nathaniel Ashford talked to the horizon, to fence posts, to the sky. He didn't talk face to face, but today he did. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever knew, not because she wasn't afraid. She was terrified. Cancer terrified her. Dying terrified her. Leaving you terrified her most of all. But she did everything anyway. Every surgery, every treatment. Every morning she woke up knowing it was getting worse, and she still got out of bed and taught 3rd graders how to read." His voice was steady. The words came slow, measured, like rounds being loaded one at a time. "And the thing that scared her most, more than dying, was leaving you in a world that would try to make you small. She knew what this world does to girls who are quiet and smart and different. She knew they'd try to put you in a box. And she wanted to make sure you had something that could break any box they built." "A rifle?" "No, the mind behind the rifle. The discipline, the patience, the refusal to accept anyone else's definition of what's possible. The rifle was just the tool. The weapon was always you. Elena turned away. She faced the 400-yard plate and raised the rifle and fired 3 rounds so fast the impact sounded like a single continuous ring of steel on steel. All 3 center, all 3 perfect. She lowered the rifle. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. Thanks, Dad. Don't thank me, thank your mother. I can't, she's not here. She's here, Elena. She's been here the whole time. Where do you think the stubbornness comes from? Sure as hell isn't from me. It was the closest thing to a joke Nathaniel Ashford had made in 23 years. Elena laughed. It came out broken and raw, halfway between a laugh and something else. And it was the most honest sound she'd made since Alaska. On day 9, Elena called Callaway. Trent, Ghost, how's Wyoming? Cold, quiet, good. Sleeping better? Not perfect, better. That's how it goes. It comes back in pieces. I need to tell you something, Elena said. Okay, you were right to call Brennan, and I'm sorry I walked away from you in that hallway. Silence on the line. Then Callaway's voice, rougher than usual. You don't owe me an apology. Yeah, I do. Because you did something hard. You went against what I wanted because you saw something I couldn't see. That takes a different kind of courage than lying on an ice shelf. More silence. Then, you're going to make me emotional, Ghost, and I've got a reputation to maintain. Your reputation is that you're the second best shooter in the unit. Second best? Who's first? I'm hanging up now. Ghost, yeah? We miss you here, all of us. Come back when you're ready. I will. She hung up and looked at her phone for a moment. Then she opened her contacts and found another number. Captain Garrett Blackwood. He answered on the 3rd ring. Staff Sergeant Ashford. Captain, I hope this isn't a bad time. Not at all. Good to hear from you. Everything okay? Everything's fine, sir. I wanted to ask about your team. Pierce is walking without a crutch now. Full recovery. Howren's back on light duty. Owen's already running his mouth about getting back to full deployment status. Blackwood paused. And Holden put in a request to attend the sniper school observation course. Elena closed her eyes. Of everything she'd heard since Alaska, the commendation, the technical review, the Silver Star recommendation, this hit differently. Because Holden wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for himself. He was walking toward the thing he'd been wrong about instead of away from it. That's good, sir, she said quietly. That's really good. One more thing, Elena. I know this is unusual, but I wanted you to know that letter I wrote for your record. I meant every word. What you did for my team wasn't just a shot. It was 9 lives, including mine. And I wanted to make sure that was documented properly. Elena's throat felt tight. I appreciate that, Captain. No, thank you, Staff Sergeant, for everything. The call ended. Elena stood on the porch of her father's house and watched the sun set over the Absaroka Mountains. The wind was steady at 18 miles per hour, west-southwest. She wasn't calculating, just listening. On day 12, Elena packed her truck. Nathaniel stood on the porch with his coffee mug, the ritual of 29 years. The same porch, the same man, the same unspoken language of silences that meant more than words. Heading back? He asked. Yes, sir. Ready? Elena thought about it. Not the reflexive answer, the real one. I think so. Not 100%, but close enough to start. 90% is still an A. Since when do you grade on a curve? Nathaniel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Since my daughter started shooting past 3,000 meters, old standards don't apply. Elena loaded the last of her gear into the truck, everything in its place. Rifle in the back seat, notebook in the center console. She turned to her father. The words she'd been building toward for 12 days. The thing she'd come home to find without knowing she was looking for it. Dad, I need to say something. Go ahead. I've spent my whole life thinking the math was enough, that if I could solve the equation, nothing else mattered. Who I was, what people thought, how they looked at me. None of it mattered as long as the bullet went where I sent it. She took a breath. I was wrong. The math is necessary, but it's not sufficient because the math didn't get me through those 21 minutes. Something else did. What? Nathaniel asked. You. Mom. Every morning you stood on this porch and watched me drive away and didn't say stop. Every night you loaded rounds at that bench so I'd have something to shoot the next day. Every time you answered on the sixth ring with one word, and I knew that one word meant everything. Nathaniel's coffee mug was trembling, just slightly, a vibration so small that only someone who measured the world in fractions of a milliradian could have seen it. Elena. I'm not done. Her voice was steady, the steadiest it had been since Alaska. The bullet doesn't know who fired it. You told me that when I was 12 and I missed a shot on a coyote. And it's true, but I know who loaded it. I know who taught me to read the wind. I know who drove 2 hours to Billings and shook my hand and drove back without a word. The bullet doesn't know, but I do. Nathaniel set the mug on the porch railing. He stepped forward, and Nathaniel Ashford, who hadn't hugged his daughter since she was 6 years old, who communicated in phone calls that lasted less than a minute and answered on the sixth ring and said one word that meant everything, put his arms around her. He held on for a long time. Neither of them spoke. Because some things exist in a space that language can't reach. They live in the pressure of arms around shoulders, in the smell of coffee and wood smoke, in the way a father's chest shakes just once when he's holding something he was afraid he'd lost. When he let go, his eyes were red. He cleared his throat, picked up his mug, took a sip of coffee that had gone cold. Drive safe, he said. I will. Call me when you get in. Sixth ring. Sixth ring. She started to get in the truck, then turned back. Dad? Yeah? Thank you for teaching me to be lethal. Nathaniel's voice came out quieter than usual. Thank your mother. I just followed orders. Fort Carson, 2 weeks later. Elena stood in front of a classroom. 12 shooters from the Extreme Long Range Unit filled the seats. Callaway in the front row. Staff Sergeant Jorge Ramos beside him. Master Sergeant William Grant in the back, arms crossed. She taught the acoustic wind assessment module for the first time. 3 hours of instruction. Theory, application, field technique. How to listen for frequency shifts in channeled wind. How to estimate speed from sound. How to integrate audio data into a ballistic solution when visual indicators failed. When she finished, Grant raised his hand. Question, Staff Sergeant. Go ahead, Master Sergeant. Grant was 61 years old, Gulf War veteran. He'd known Nathaniel Ashford in Somalia. His face was weathered stone, but his eyes were soft. My daughter enlisted last month, he said. She wants to be a shooter. The room went quiet. What do you want me to say, Master Sergeant? I want you to tell me she's going to be okay. Elena looked at him, at the stone face and the soft eyes and the father underneath all that armor. I can't tell you she's going to be okay. Nobody can promise that, but I can tell you this. If she's anything like her father, she'll have the discipline. And if you teach her what my father taught me, she'll have everything else. What did your father teach you? Elena glanced at the window. The wind was blowing across the Colorado plains, bending the grass in long, slow waves. He taught me to listen, she said. The class ended. The shooters filed out. Elena packed up her materials. She was the last one in the room. In the hallway outside, someone had pinned a printed copy of the after-action report from Alaska. Just the summary line, no classification markings, just the words, confirmed precision engagement at 3,218 meters in blizzard conditions. Temperature minus 34 Celsius, sustained crosswind 65 to 70 kilometers per hour, second round correction. Below it, someone had written in black marker, the bullet doesn't know who fired it, it only knows the math. Elena pulled a pen from her pocket. She added one line beneath it, but the shooter knows everything else. SSGE. Ashford, in memory of MSGT Tobias Kincaid, Colonel Nathaniel Ashford, and Margaret Ashford, who taught me to be lethal. She capped the pen and walked down the hallway, pushed through the doors into the Colorado wind, 22 miles per hour, southwest. She didn't calculate trajectory or holdover, just felt it against her face. Somewhere in Alaska, a ridgeline stood empty. Somewhere in Wyoming, Nathaniel loaded rounds at a bench. Somewhere in a hospital, Landon Pierce walked on two good legs. And somewhere between heartbeats, in that ancient silence where everything is decided, a legacy continued. Not because of one shot, because of a chain that stretched from the Chosin Reservoir in 1950 to the deserts of Iraq, to a frozen mountain in Alaska. A chain of knowledge passed from teacher to student, from father to daughter, from one generation of warriors to the next. Tobias Kincaid taught Nathaniel Ashford. Nathaniel Ashford taught Elena Ashford. And Elena would teach whoever came next. Because the wind keeps talking, and someone needs to listen. 3,218 meters, 5.8 seconds of flight time, 9 lives saved. Not because it was possible, because one woman refused to accept the word impossible. And because a Marine, a rancher, a mother, and a gunnery sergeant from a forgotten war had taught her something the world didn't know: how to hear what others couldn't, how to calculate what others wouldn't, how to stay when others would run, and how to turn mathematics into miracles. The bullet doesn't know who fired it, but the shooter knows everything else, and that makes all the difference.